Greetings to those who desire to teach others how to lead. This is the 6th lesson in the Teaching Leadership series. We're going to talk about leadership qualifications. Now, you remember the first section, the first 4 lessons were on the foundations for leadership. Now we are in the second lesson on what are the qualities that make a good leader. And so hopefully this will be a benefit to you as a leader and to those that you would like to teach to be a leader. However, we're going to start with a discussion. So divide your people up however is best for you and your situation. In some places, it would just be the person next to them. In others, you can put them in groups of 3, 4, 5 and have them discuss this question of why would a person desire to become a leader? Now, while the students are talking, you might mention some of the problems that leaders encounter, like criticism, fatigue, how do you find time for the family, the temptations that come to leaders. With all of this negative that's possible in leadership, why would a person desire to become a leader? That's a crucial question because the Apostle Paul tells Timothy that the first qualification for being a leader is the desire to be a leader. Let's take a look at this passage of scripture that we're going to be talking about, found in 1 Timothy 3, 1 through 13. The saying is trustworthy: if anyone aspires to the office of overseer, he desires a noble task. See, right there it begins. He aspires to it, he desires to it. So it has to be a person who wants to be a leader, as our discussion was about. Therefore, an overseer must be above reproach, the husband of one wife, sober-minded, self-controlled, respectable, hospitable, able to teach, not a drunkard, not violent, but gentle, not quarrelsome, not a lover of money. He must manage his own household well, with all dignity, keeping his children submissive. For if someone does not know how to manage his own household, how will he care for God's church? He must not be a recent convert, or he may be puffed up with conceit and fall into the condemnation of the devil. Moreover, he must be well thought of by outsiders, so that he may not fall into disgrace or into the snare of the devil. Deacons likewise must be dignified, not double-tongued, not addicted to much wine, not greedy for dishonest gain. They must hold to the mystery of the faith with a clear conscience, and let them also be tested first. Then let them serve as deacons if they prove themselves blameless. Their wives likewise must be dignified, not slanderous, but sober-minded, faithful in all things. Let deacons each be the husband of one wife, managing their children and their own household well. For those who serve well as deacons gain a good standing for themselves and also great confidence in the faith. I believe as we look at this list that there are only 2 major qualifications. I know people look at this list and they see a long list of different things that a leader should or should not be. However, I think that there's just 2 qualifications, and those long lists that we often look at are just illustrations of the points that Paul is trying to make. And the first is the one we just talked about, a desire to serve God's people. Because in 1 Timothy 3:1, he says, he who desires the office of an overseer desires a noble task. In 1 Peter 5:2, Peter talks about the leader serving willingly. And so there has to be this desire in the person's heart to serve. Second of all is they must live a life above reproach. This is mentioned 3 times in this list. Let him be above reproach, good report, as some translations put it. And this is the one I believe that the other items mentioned in this passage of scripture are only illustrations concerning being above reproach. And we're going to look at that further as we go through these lessons. Let's just take a look at the desire to serve. And I believe that there are several points that we can make under this, and your students have these points in their workbook with blanks that they can fill in. Remember, the red words here are words that are needed to fill in the student's workbook. And so make sure that you mention them, highlight them in some way, and so that they know this is what they write in their workbook. A heart for searching the scriptures. And we're going to begin our diagram. And so on the chalkboard or the paper, whatever you're using, draw the heart as the first part of the diagram. Not only a desire for searching the scriptures, but there also must be a desire for shepherding God's flock, a desire to take care of God's people. When Paul met with the Ephesian elders on his way to Rome, he told them that they were to take care of the flock that had been assigned to them. 1 Peter 5, Peter uses this analogy of the leader as the shepherd throughout this passage of scripture. So we're not to be a person who desires to be in control over people, having power over people, having authority, but the heart of a shepherd who cares for the sheep, feeds the sheep, binds up the wounds of the sheep, seeks the lost sheep, and knows the needs of the sheep and prepares for the needs of the sheep. We're looking for people who have that heart of a shepherd. Twice Peter refers to the church elders as shepherds. And Peter refers to Jesus as the great shepherd. And so this concept of shepherding is all through the scriptures. It's in the Old Testament, the prophet Isaiah, the prophet Zechariah. It's in the New Testament and the teachings of Jesus in John chapter 10 and other places where the whole concept of shepherding is there. We'll take a look at that in the next lesson in a complete study. Our leaders have to have a heart to pray for the sick, because James says that if a person is ill, they should be able to call the leaders of the church and they will come and pray for that person. Too many times I've heard stories of people who have called for the leaders in the church to come and pray, and the leaders argue amongst themselves over who has to go, or did this person ask properly for somebody to come. You see, that's not the heart of a shepherd. That's not a heart to pray for the sick. So make sure when you choose a person in leadership that they have this heart of a shepherd and they have a willingness. Yes, I would be willing to go and pray for people who need it. They have to have a heart to encourage others in ministry. Paul tells Timothy in chapter 4, verse 14, that he's to encourage them, to build them up and make them stronger. In Hebrews, the writer of Hebrews in 10:25 says encouragement is the responsibility of everybody. We're supposed to encourage one another to love and do good works. And if we have leaders who are not willing to do encouragement, we're going to have trouble, because we have a power-based leader and not a servant-based leader. They need to have a heart that stands before God's judgment, because Hebrews 13:17 says that the leader must give a report before the throne of God concerning their actions. And so the people we have in leadership have to be people who want to walk with the Lord, are going to grow in their relationship with the Lord, and they're going to follow so that all their life measures to the cornerstone, so that when they stand before the throne of God, they will stand there with confidence, knowing that they have treated God's sheep properly. So let's have another discussion. Divide your people up again. What can happen in a church when the congregation puts a person in leadership who does not have a heart or a desire to be a leader? Talk about this for a few minutes. Allow the people to give a report back to you as to what they discussed. Now let's take a look at the second qualification that I believe Paul's mentioning here, and that they are to have a life that is above reproach. We don't want anyone in the church leadership that when the people in the community or in the family find out about, oh, this person's a leader in the church, they say, oh, I don't want to have anything to do with that person. Do you know what they do? Do you know how they act? Do you know what they've done that is negative? So that when a person hears this individual is a leader in your church, well, I would never go to your church if that's the kind of people you have. You see, that's what Paul was dealing with. And that's why Paul is so strong in talking about the leader has to be above reproach. They have to have a good report from his or her family. Now we're going to put the house over here, and you need to draw a house that looks like a house in your culture. So if you're in Africa, you might need to draw a round house. If you're in Asia, you might have to draw a house that's up on stilts. Whatever your culture is, make sure you draw the picture of the house that your people understand. But a good report from his or her family. Examples, illustrations of the point. Do they have just one spouse? Do their children obey out of respect to the person? Not obedience out of fear, but obedience out of respect. Is the person temperate, self-controlled? They keep all things in moderation, such as drinking. They're not a drunkard, Paul says. So when you go and you talk to the family, can you see this person as a leader in the church? These are some of the questions you might want to ask. This might be what you want to listen for. And then we talk to the community, neighbors, fellow workers. And we're going to ask some similar questions here because Paul gives some illustrations about what is their reputation in the community. Are they respected? Are they an example to others? Would you want other people in your community to be like this person? He's not a heavy drinker. He's not known as a person who's hungry for money. He's not a violent person. All of these had to deal with what's their reputation in the community. And I believe that if we're choosing people to be in leadership in the church, we need to go to the community and ask them, would you follow this person? Would you recommend this person to be a leader in the church? They're not argumentative, always wanting to fight, always wanting to argue. So the reputation outside of the church needs to be good. So you need to have a good report from the family. They have to have a good report from the community. And they must also have a good report from the church. Now, once again, in my diagram, I've given to you kind of a Western style church building. You need to draw a church building picture that your people can identify with. And so that when they look at the picture, they know that it's a church. And so be careful to draw one that is appropriate to your culture. In the church, is this individual known to be hospitable to travelers? For elders, if we're considering a person to be an elder in the congregation, are they able to teach? And not only are they able to teach, but going back to the first qualification, are they willing to teach? I've known men in the churches where I have served that had the knowledge and could teach, but they're not willing to teach. They won't accept the responsibility. All other qualifications mentioned for the community must be applied to the church also. Not argumentative, not they care about people and so forth. All have to be there. And so their life has to be above reproach, that wherever you look, whether you look in their home, whether you look in the community, whether you look in the church, this person will have a good report. So let's have another discussion. How many churches represented in this class interview other people within the church fellowship concerning the character of a person suggested for leadership? Or do we just bring that person into leadership? Or do we have a vote, all in favor of this person being a leader? Raise your hand. Or do you actually go and talk to people which you follow? In the church of where I served, when people were asked to give names of individuals in the church that they would look to for spiritual leadership, and we asked the question like this: in the absence of the pastor and the elders, who would you turn to for leadership advice? And it was interesting, the people we got the names of showed us, first of all, who the people in the congregation were looking to. But we could also go to that person and say, do you realize that your name was mentioned as a possible leader in the church? And that's a real surprise to some people, because they would never consider themselves to be that. And I've seen it in several cases where when you go and say, people are looking at you, that has brought a complete change in lifestyle and purpose when the person knew that others were looking to them for spiritual example. So in your discussion, do you go to the church? Do you go to the family? Do you go to the community and seek information about how a person qualifies in these areas? So the leadership of a church is a demanding responsibility. As we said in the beginning, it takes time. It'll be fatigue. There'll be criticism. There'll be many different things that can come upon the person. But we need men and women leading the church who are willing to accept this demanding responsibility and see it as a noble task. The goal of leadership of the church is to see people come to Christ and have the opportunity to mature in that relationship. The church must be led by people of high character whose life will bring no reproach on Christ or his church.